All right, so let's start page 4 with 3 more graphs. The first graph is a cosecant graph, which means I'm going to take a second here and I'm going to rewrite this as a sine graph, sine equation, because that's what I actually want to graph first, or at least find again those maximums and minimum points, and then the midline points become my asymptote values. So if I start going through my key features, amplitude, for the cosecant curve, the amplitude is none. That's not an issue. Period here. There's nothing attached to x that's being multiplied, so that's going to be a standard period of 2 pi. Phase shift. There's nothing being directly added to x. I know it kind of looks like it, but be careful, because if it was being directly added to x, there would need to be parentheses here. So phase shift is none, and the vertical shift is going to include this +1. So that's going to be up 1. Now, things to pay attention to. You do want to deal with this 3, and you need to deal with this negative. So what that's going to do is a reflection. Whoops. It helps if I can spell correctly. All right. Reflection over the x-axis. And the 3, for the sine curve, that would be an amplitude of 3. For the cosecant curve, this is a stretch. All right, so we're going to stretch each point 3 times further away from the x-axis. So if you think about the sine curve, that's going to create the amplitude of a +3 and a -3 for your highs and lows. All right, so let's start by labeling the x-axis with a period, and then I'll hit the y-axis with certain points that I need. So x-axis, starting here at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that is my 2 pi. Half is going to get me pi. Half again is pi over 2. And then triplet is 3 pi over 2. 1, 2, 3, there's my stretch. 1, 2, 3, there's my negative stretch, which isn't really a thing, it's just the stretch. Getting my lows and my highs. All right, so now for my sine curve, and I'm going to start with the sine curve and just put little X marks to spots where I need them. I have a stretch of 3, so that's going to be my highs and my lows, and I've got to go up 1. So everywhere where I'd normally put an X, I'm just going to move it up 1 space. So sine traditionally starts at the origin, but I'm going to move up 1. Then my next value, I would go up to my maximum. So in this case, it would have been a 3, but I'm going to include that +1. Down to the midline, down to the minimum, but again, we're up 1 from there, and then back to the midline. Now, I'm not going to actually draw the sine curve in. If you think it would help you, great. And I also realize there's another thing I need to fix. All of these points, I neglected to do the reflection over the x-axis. So the midline points won't change, but this high point and low point need to reflect. So my high point is going to reflect low, and my low point is going to reflect high. Now let me get rid of the extra ones there, and I just realized I put that in the wrong spot. So up 1, right there. Okay, now I got it. So don't forget the reflection like I just did. That would be bad. Okay, so let's put some asymptotes in place. Everywhere where you have your curve, your sine curve would hit what's called the midline, you want to put a vertical asymptote in place. So your y-axis is actually a vertical asymptote. You've got a vertical asymptote at pi and a vertical asymptote at 2 pi. So that takes care of the asymptotes. To actually draw the curve in place, you're going to find your high points and your low points. Those are the shared points for, in this case, cosecant and sine. This low point for sine becomes basically a high point for cosecant, so curve in and around it. Arrows at the end. This high point becomes a low point. Okay, curve in and around. And then again, everywhere where the sine curve is, there's no overlap of any kind. So make sure you leave the big gap in the middle here for the sine curve or where it would have been. Okay, so that is the finished answer for problem number 12. Okay, I'm going to slide down to number 13. We've got a sine curve, so I don't have to worry about any asymptotes for this one, which is kind of nice. But I do need to pay attention to all of the key features. So if I zoom in a little bit, amplitude here, there's no number in front, so we assume an amplitude of 1. Period. I'm going to take what's being multiplied by the x, in this case the 4. Standard period's 2 pi. We're going to divide by 4, so that's going to be pi over 2. So next we've got to deal with the phase shift. So I'm going to take this whole argument here. So I'm going to leave a little space for myself. So 4x plus 3 pi over 2 set equal to 0. So 4x equals negative 3 pi over 2. Divide by 4, which is the same thing as multiplying by 1/4. So x is equal to negative 3 pi over 8. So that's going to be my phase shift. So that's going to make it left 3 pi over 8. I'll figure out how many spaces that is once I've labeled the x-axis. And I have a vertical shift here of down 3. So down 3. So I'm going to use my period, and I'm going to label the x-axis. So starting at the origin here, there's my 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is, whoops, helps if I write the right thing. This is pi over 2. Chop it in half, pi over 4. Chop that in half, pi over 8. Triple it, so 3 pi over 8. All right, so 3 pi over 8 was our phase shift. So 1, 2. This is going to be a 3-space phase shift. Okay, so where it says that we need to move left 3 pi over 8, that's going to be 3 spaces. Okay, so I'm going to do what I normally do, which is do X marks the spots for my amplitude and period. That's one joined piece. And then I will deal with the phase shift and the vertical shift. It just makes it easier for me to keep track of what's what. Oh, before I do any of that, let me label the y-axis. I keep forgetting that. So there's 1, there's negative 1. Please don't do what I'm doing. Make sure you label your axes. And if you do it at the end of the problem, that's fine too. Okay, so sine curve would start at the origin, increase up, back to the midline, to the minimum, and then up to the midline again. So those little X marks the spots. Every single one of them needs to move down 3 spaces and left 3 spaces. The order that you do these two does not matter, but all of them need to move. So I'm going to take this point at the origin. I'm going to go left 1, 2, 3, down 1, 2, 3, and I'm pretty sure my point is sitting right there. All right, so now I'm going to go up to the maximum, midline, minimum, midline. That creates this lovely curve. And because it moved as much as it did, I really need to pay attention to labeling the right things here. So now this was the minimum originally of negative 1. That doesn't include any of these points. So let's go ahead and label the y-axis. Negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. So that'll catch my minimums and maximums. And then for the x-axis, remember all these values on the x-axis to the right, you can mirror them to the left. So negative pi over 8, negative pi over 4, negative 3 pi over 8. And that's the farthest point to the left. So could you put negative pi over 2? Absolutely. You just don't need to. All right. So that curve is one period of that sine function. All right, we've got one more to get through on page 4. Page 14? No, page 4, problem 14. All right. Be careful that you don't, mess up with this 3 here. This 3 is not the amplitude. Most of the time you guys have seen this at the end of the problem, but it can be in the front. It's actually going to become your vertical shift. So that 3 is positive. It's going to be up 3. Amplitude, you got a positive 2 sitting right in front of cosine as the multiplier. So that's going to be an amplitude of 2. And then we've got to change period because x is being multiplied by something here. So in this case, it's being multiplied by 1/4. So if I take the standard period of 2 pi and I divide by 1/4, that would turn into multiplication by 4, which is a period of 8 pi. All right. Phase shift, I'm going to take the whole thing, x over 4 minus, let me actually draw pi correctly, minus pi equals 0. So x over 4 equals positive pi, multiply both sides by 4, x is going to equal 4 pi. So your phase shift is going to be right 4 pi. All right, let's label the x and y axis for amplitude and period. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's my 8 pi. Chop it in half, 4 pi, chop it in half, 2 pi, triplet, 6 pi. Okay, and then to label on the y-axis, my amplitude was 2, so positive 2 would be needed, and negative 2 would be needed. And again, I do the same thing all the time. I tend to do the amplitude and period as one little X marks the spots. Then I will deal with the phase shift and vertical shift. So cosine curve should start off center at your maximum. You're going to drop down to the midline, drop down to the minimum. You're going to come back up. Whoops, as I throw the whole graph out of whack here. Come back up through the midline and then up to the maximum. You start and end in the same position, but each one of these points has to now move. So let's see how far it has to move. If I need to move right pi over, no, hold on, right 4 pi, read the right thing, right 4 pi, 4 pi is 2 spaces, all right? So 2 spaces to the right and up 3 spaces. So every point, 2 spaces to the right, and then up 1, 2, 3. So your point's going to sit up here, and then we're going to have this point. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 up, 1, 2 over. There we go. And this point way down here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. All right, back up, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then farthest. Let's be right here in that corner. Now again, I know I've told you guys this in class when we were first doing these graphs, especially for cosine. This is not a V. You absolutely 100% need to make sure you are doing curves. So curve, 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 and curve. Don't get too weirded out if you have some wobble or shake to your line. That's not going to bother me. But you need to make sure that you are curving into these maximum points and curving into these minimum points. All right. Please don't make a V shape. I will knock points off for that because that's not the shape of the curve. Okay. To finish this out, I want to finish labeling the X and Y axis. So x-axis 2 pi 4 6 8. So this is going to be 10 pi and then 12 pi. And then to finish up on the y-axis here, we had already labeled 1. So 3, 4, and then 5. That is a horrible 3. That's slightly better. Okay. So that takes us through the end of page 4. I'll get a couple more videos for the last 2 pages. Let me know if you guys have any questions.